Welcome to Foodonomics. Today I'm going to be showing you guys how to make some doughs and breads that you can make ahead of time in big batches and freeze and keep frozen for later on throughout the month. I'm starting off here with the pizza dough. This is going to make 3 separate pizza doughs, and with this pizza dough I'm going to be each of the 3 pieces is going to make 1 medium to large pizza and about 3 to 4 small calzones. So the dry mixture that I started with here, and I use active yeast so I don't have to wait for it to proof because I've been using it for the last several weeks, so I know it's already good. In this flour mix here, I have 7.5 cups of flour, 3 teaspoons of instant yeast, 4 to 6 teaspoons of sugar, 2 teaspoons of salt, maybe 3 if you like a little more than I usually use, a lot less, and 3 cups of warm water. I mixed up all the dry ingredients and then I made a well and I added the warm water to the mix. Completely. This might be a little bit dry if you go ahead and put all 7.5 cups of flour in at first. I did find it a little bit dry, but it's also super hot and humid in my house right now. I didn't realize how high I had the heater on, and so some of the doughs in this recipe did turn out a little bit different from how they normally turn out. They were a little bit dry or were drying up quickly. So it shouldn't be a problem if your temperature in the home is like regular room temperature. But I did go ahead and add some extra water and turned this, like, just bring it all together and mix it up together and start to knead it, or really mix it together until it turns into sort of a dough ball. And it's going to be, more than likely, it's going to be a little sticky at first. I would suggest the last cup or the last cup and a half, add it a little slowly after you've mixed the water in, a little bit at a time, so that you don't end up getting this dry ball like I have over here. However, if you do end up like this, there's nothing wrong at all. You can add a little more water, and then you do have to add oil as well into the mixture at some point, so you can salvage the dough. There's no problem with it at all. Like, it's not gone to waste or anything like that. But if you can see, mine is like a hard brick in this here, but I managed to add a little more water, and then I did end up fixing it, and I'm just trying not to waste like half a cup of flour in the bowl over there. But yeah, so I managed to bring it to this particular state after kneading it for about 5 to 8 minutes. This is what it looked like, and I really had to knead it hard because it was a really tough and dry dough, but it gets better. So you do have to add about 3 teaspoons or tablespoons, actually. I'm gonna say tablespoons because that's what I remember adding. There it is. Yes, it's 3 tablespoons of olive oil. This is something that I normally would have done while it was still in the bowl, but of course it slipped my mind and I completely forgot about it. So that's what the dough looked like after I'd added the olive oil, and I had to fold the oil into the dough. So if you're making this, I hope you haven't already started making it with the video. I would suggest you add the oil while it's still in the bowl. Of course, I got the bowl all cleaned up, and then I'm adding the last teaspoon of olive oil on top here. Just not really a whole teaspoon or whatever. I'm just adding some to like cover the dough to keep it moist so that it doesn't dry up while it's proofing. And then I'm just putting some plastic wrap on top. Usually I would put like a towel, but I didn't end up using a towel today. So just put some plastic wrap on top and let it sit. You have to let this dough rise before you put it in the freezer. Otherwise, it's not going to freeze right. Now this is, I believe, for tacos. No, sorry, not tacos, but tortillas, flour tortillas. This is 4 cups of flour, half a block of butter, basically. I just doubled the recipe that I normally make, so half a block of butter, and I added 1 teaspoon of baking powder and 1 to 2 teaspoons, 1.5 teaspoons ish of salt in there, and then I just mixed up all the dry ingredients together. And you see the half a block of butter. When I say that, I mean, like, I think it's like 2 cups of butter, or about 1/3 and a half of a third, based on the measurements that they have on the side there. So you have to kind of cut the butter up into tiny little cubes, not really tiny little cubes, but like a dice, or a little bigger is fine too. But something you can work with. I don't believe I used this entire block. I felt like, yeah, I didn't use this entire block. I cut even this half into 3 pieces or something like that, and then I used only the 2.5 pieces, and then I used the rest to just add in at the end to keep the balls of dough moist and not dry out before I cooked them. I'm not actually going to show the entire recipe. I'm only going to show you how to make the dough for this tortilla, because I do have a shorts video which I'm going to link below in the descriptions, and I also showed you guys how to make the tortillas, the flour tortillas, in the previous video that I posted with the freezer meals, for breakfast freezer meals, and those were a little bit smaller than these ones, but definitely the same recipe, and I just made the dough balls a little bit smaller then. But instead of 4 cups of flour, it was like 2 cups and half of everything that I just said today. So yeah, so this is how small I cut up all the butter, and I basically just started to massage the butter into the flour. Now, this is not the same as making pie crust. When you're making pie crust, you want to have big, chunky, flat pieces of butter inside so that you can get some flaky pastry when you bake it, but which I'm going to show you in a little bit, because I did make some pie crust for later as well. So basically, the total that I made here was three rolls of chocolate chip cookies to freeze, so that, you know, it's kind of like those Pillsbury chocolate chip cookie doughs that they sell at the grocery stores, where you could just take it out of the freezer, cut it into pieces, put it on a baking sheet or a cookie sheet, and then bake it, and it comes out as a cookie. Difference is, this is like pennies per roll, and it's homemade, so everything in it is completely organic, or completely, like, you know exactly what's in there. There's no preservatives of any sort, whatnot, so it's a lot healthier. Granted, I did use some leftover chocolate from Christmas, and not actual chocolate chips. We made it more like a chocolate chunk cookies. But so yeah, so 3 rolls of chocolate chip cookie dough, 2 pie crusts. That's something you can use for either chicken pot pie or turkey pot pie, whatever pot pie, or to make an actual pie, like an apple pie or whatnot. We make a lot of pumpkin pie in our household. And I made a total of 15 tortillas, which half of which are going to go in the freezer, and the other half is going to go in the fridge, so that we have something right there and ready to take out and roll into a taco or a burrito or something and eat. And we also made the pizza doughs, which basically was 3 whole pizza doughs. One of them was a little smaller than the other. You'll see at the end. I wasn't really good at measuring with my eyes. I guess I cut them all in. I cut the whole dough into like 3 uneven parts, but nevertheless, it'll still make 1 whole medium to large pizza, the last one, but the other 2 will definitely make 1 whole pizza and about 3 or 4 calzones. Those are like pizza pops type of things, hand pies, hand pizza pies. And those are great. Like if you have kids, you want to send a really tasty, delicious lunch with them, those calzones are really great to make. So yeah, when you've incorporated all of the dry mix here, and you're adding the water to turn this into a dough ball, make sure you add the water a little at a time. I did pour half a cup of water in all at once, and the rest I did add a little at a time so that it doesn't turn into a soggy dough. This one, it's not one that you want to be too wet. Still need it moist, but you don't need it to be too wet. Unlike the pie crust, this is a very similar recipe to the pie crust because there's no yeast and it's all flour and butter basically. But unlike the pie crust, you do have to knead this a little bit just to get the dough formed right and to get the dough balls formed right. So I'm gonna keep going here and making this into a dough ball. So I decided to speed this video up a little bit for you guys so you don't have to sit here and watch me completely rolling a dough for the next pretty much 20 minutes or something. That's how long I think if I didn't speed it up it would have been. No, not 20 minutes to 30, just maybe like 5 minutes. But who wants to sit there and watch a 5-minute video of someone kneading the dough? So that's how the dough was when I finally finished it. I put 2 tiny knobs of butter. I spread it all over the dough first, and then I put them on each side before I wrapped up the dough or the container with the plastic wrap again. And then you leave this for 20 minutes. Now remember, the pizza dough is rising for about 2 hours or until it's doubled. You don't want to overproof it. If it doubles before it's 2 hours, then you can go ahead and take it out of the bowl and cut it into the 3 pieces or whatnot. I really don't know what I just did there with this dough. It was perfectly fine and round, and I went and started tearing it up for no reason. But we've got it back to think, oh, I just wanted to get some more butter in there, that's why. So now we've got it back to, I think I have the camera a little bit off too in this situation here, but we've got it back to a round shape. And see how it bounces back. I did that with the pizza dough before too, and it has to bounce back when you press on the dough. It has to bounce back. That's how you know that the dough's forming gluten and it's getting ready. Basically, it's a dough ball now. So I covered this up with a plastic wrap as well, just like I did the pizza dough. And this has to sit for 20 minutes before you make the dough balls, and then you roll it out and then you start cooking it. Of course, it's okay to leave it a little longer. I actually ended up leaving it for about an hour because while I was making the other doughs or recipes for the freezers today, I didn't actually have the time to go back to the tortilla dough and take it apart and turn it into balls and whatnot. So I did leave it for about an hour. Nothing's gonna happen to it. It's not gonna, it's not actually proofing or anything. It's just sitting there getting soft, and it gets very stretchy, and it gets more malleable. I find that's what happens to the dough when you leave it for a little bit. But I wouldn't suggest leaving it for 3, 4, 5 hours. That I really don't know what will happen to it. I've never done that before, but I don't think it would be a good idea. Now, this is the pie crust. I have here the pie crust recipe. It's 2.5 cups of flour, 2/3 to 1 full cup of butter, diced into 1-inch cubes. It's really up to you whether you want to use 2/3 or 1 full cup. 1 teaspoon of salt, 2 tablespoons of brown sugar. You can use white sugar as well. And I have a cup of water, but you have to add the water 1 tablespoon at a time for this. You cannot make this dough too moist. It has to be a little bit dry. The only thing you're going to do with it is you're going to bring it together at the end into like a ball, but not necessarily a dough ball. You want to get it all together, incorporated, but not you don't want it to form any gluten. You don't want it to rise or form any gluten or turn into an actual like bready dough. You basically just, it's wet flour stuck together. That's what it's supposed to look like. It will stick together a little better as you bring it together, but it cannot turn into an actual dough ball where if you pick it up, nothing falls apart, sort of thing. So when you have the butter, you see here I'm breaking up the butter into pieces. However, you have to make sure that you don't turn it into like tiny little pieces like I did with the tortillas, because this butter actually has, so you have to see great big chunks of butter. Well, it's a lot tastier if you do that. It'll give you that nice flaky pastry if you have big chunks of flat butter in the pie crust itself. Like when you're done putting it together and you form like a little disc or whatever, you'll see like little layers. You'll see at the end here when I finish with this pie crust that it's like that. So when I feel like the butter was, you see like those chunks are still in there, when I felt that the butter was small enough and incorporated enough, I started adding the water. As you can see, I'm just adding a little bit at a time, and I'm not forming a ball. I'm just trying to get it together. I'm just trying to push it all in together into one form, but not necessarily a ball of dough. So once you get it together and it's sort of coming together a little bit, you just want to kind of transfer it to the table, because it's easier to form a little disc on the table than it is in the bowl, especially because this is not like a doughy ball. It's still just slightly wet flour coming together. So at this point I just put everything onto the table, and I started to just form the discs that I wanted. I just started to bring it together with my hands and just stuck it together. See how I'm not rolling it and I'm not kneading it. I'm just sticking it together and pushing the flour together into sort of a round shape. Once I got that, I just cut it up into 2 sections. I have no idea where the actual dough cutter is. I need to invest in one, because cutting the dough, I mean, you'll see later when I cut my pizza dough as well with this little knife, was not fun. It didn't work out as well. So the best way to get to form like a perfect little disc for this pie crust is to wrap it up in the plastic wrap, and then just, I guess I had a little bit of air bubbles or something in there. So wrap it up tight in the plastic wrap and then form it into like a little circle and then flatten it out. Do the same thing with the second one. And once I do this, I'm just going to flash freeze this pie crust in the freezer really quickly for about half an hour to 1 hour before I put it into the freezer bags to stay there for a month or for a couple of weeks, or it'll actually last you for about 2 months. I've never kept it longer than that, but I imagine anything longer would probably end up with freezer burns and may not be as tasty. Now we're making cookie dough. This is actually one of my favorite recipes here on this video. So you see here brown sugar. I have in the bowl already half a cup of brown sugar and a quarter cup of white sugar. Actually, I didn't add the white sugar at all. I did the whole thing in 3/4 of white sugar. Actually, no, sorry, I lied. I did triple the recipe. Therefore, it's 1.5 cups of brown sugar, and I didn't add the white sugar just because I don't keep white sugar in the house at all. And 1 cup of butter softened. I have 2 large eggs. I didn't add vanilla extract to this. We ran out. We don't have any right now. So I wanted the cookies anyway, and to be honest, I did make one of the batches already today, and it was not that bad. It's tasted pretty much the same. I really couldn't tell the difference without the vanilla. And then I brought all of that together first. So you want to bring this together first before you add the flour. And in this recipe is 3 cups of flour. I'm adding the salt, which is 1 teaspoon of salt, 1 full teaspoon of salt, and 1.5 teaspoons of baking soda, not baking powder, but baking soda. I'm adding that into the wet mixture before I add the flour as well. Technically, usually I would have gotten a separate bowl and added the salt and the baking soda into the flour first. Not a big deal at all. You can just incorporate it in here. Now, I only added the first cup of flour first and I folded it in. The reason being is you'll see what happens when I start to beat the mixture with the flour in it afterwards. But at first it was definitely not that it's definitely better to just fold it into the mixture first while the butter and everything is just like freshly beat. And now I'm adding the rest of the butter, mostly, like, I think at this point I have 1.5 cups in there. Still folding it in. I thought I might have went ahead and beat it by now, but I guess I didn't. But you'll see when you start to beat the butter into the wet mixture, you'll see a whole lot of the flour from the top just sort of start floating into the air, and it kind of gets everywhere. So that's basically the reason why I didn't want to use the beater with 3 whole cups of flour. And so right now it's 2.5, and this is the 3rd cup of flour. I'm just gonna go ahead and add most of it in there and see this. There you go. Do you see all the smoky flour coming up? That's why I didn't add it at first. But no problem. I do need to, again, invest in some more things. One of them would probably be a stand mixer, like a KitchenAid stand mixer, like a dough mixer. That might not cause this much of a mess. You can't really see it on the camera here, but there was basically flour everywhere. At this point, I gave up and I decided to go in there with my hands. Of course, this is cookie dough, so it's not a big deal to use your hands because the flour will get incorporated, and it's not going to be like a chunk of flour left in the dough somewhere, because this is a pretty wet dough right now, but it's wet in a very, I don't even know how to explain it. It's wet in a way where it grabs onto the flour and not how it smears everywhere, because it's all butter, right? Butter slides off of things. So yeah, so I just went ahead and mixed it with my hand, and then I just poured it all out onto the board again, like I did with the pie crust, to form the 3 logs of cookie dough that I'm going to put away. I believe 1 roll or 1 log makes about 8 cookies. So we have 3 here. That's about 24 cookies, maybe more. The first batch that I made, this is a cup of the leftover chocolate that we had from Christmas. We just cut it up into pieces and we threw it in here. Of course, this makes it a chocolate chunk cookie and not a chocolate chip cookie. But once you, if you had too much, or if you had made it a little uneven like I did, I know the first batch of cookies that we made had actually 9 cookies and not 8. So that was kind of awesome. More cookies is always great. But yeah, now that it's together, as you can see, it's like completely together. The dough is not sticking to the bowl at all. It wants to stick to itself, basically. And that's what the butter does. That's that amount of butter and sugar. And I just rolled it into a log first. Tightened it all up together first, make sure everything's together in like that shape, and then I started to roll it out into a log. That's about the size of how you would find those Pillsbury cookie doughs in the freezer of a grocery store, the ones that you can buy and keep in your freezer and then bake in the oven whenever you feel like it. Those ready to go doughs. About that thickness, that's how big I wanted to make it. So I just kept pressing it down and rolling it out into a long log, and then I'm going to cut this into 3 pieces. Into 3 even pieces so that we would have 3 different batches of cookies to make. So that's about the right size there. It should be about maybe 3 to 4 centimeters across the dough through the middle, like or like 2 centimeter radius. When you cut it, it is going to be a circular piece, like a cylinder when you cut it. So about 2 centimeter radius. That's, I guess, 1.5-ish inch radius if you're in the US. So that's when I decided to cut it into 3 pieces, and I definitely did not make it accurate or exact. But I thought about measuring it one way, but then I decided to measure it by marking from the middle and halving it over and over until I get the right size pieces. And we found that the number of cookies that particular piece in the middle made was 8. So the end piece on the right is the one we used first, and that made us 9. I imagine the one on the left looks smaller, so I probably won't make 9, maybe, or even 8, maybe 7. So you just wrap up these little logs into the plastic, and then again you have to flash freeze them. You have to wrap it really tight, like completely airtight, almost like you would do a sushi roll, and just close up the ends as well, and then flash freeze it so that it gets frozen before you put it into a freezer bag. You do have to do the second step of putting it into the freezer bag, because if you leave it with this thin plastic, it's more likely than not gonna get frostbite in about a week or 2. This does last in your freezer for quite a while. I think like cookie dough normally lasts, I think, up to like 3 months. But we usually use up cookie dough really quick here, so not entirely sure about that, but it should last you up to 3 months, I believe. So, well, 2 months for sure. But yeah, you can freeze this, and then if you have kids, if they have play dates or friends coming over, and one day you don't have like a lot of snacks just sitting in the cupboards and whatnot, you could just take this out, cut it into pieces. 12 to 15 minutes is how long you have to bake it at 350 degrees Fahrenheit in the oven. There you have it. 3 batches of cookie doughs, all frozen and ready to go. Well, not frozen yet, but it's going to be all frozen and ready to go whenever you feel like cookies. Really just preheat the oven, and then 12 minutes later you have cookies. So at this point, I decided I had to clean up the island, because I'm about to take out the pizza dough to prepare the pizza dough to go into the freezer. Crazy thing is, I think even though it was already proofed, or it was already doubled in size, I think it continued to proof while I was cutting it, because I put my dough in the freezer and then took it out a little while later and found that it had gotten even bigger inside the plastic wrap that I wrapped it in. But anyway, so this is what it looks like right now. It has doubled in size, and I'm just gonna push that down so that it's flattened out and all that air comes out. As you see, it's now all soft and supple and nice, and it's not a brick anymore. Thank the Lord. I would not be able to deal with this if it had been as hard as it was while I was kneading it. It was so difficult to knead it. I had never had made pizza dough this hard before, but after leaving it to proof, it did turn quite soft, and I went ahead and made it into this little oval type of thing before I cut it into 3 pieces. And there it is. I rolled it up nicely. I didn't even want to show you what I did with this. I turned it upside down and I realized it wasn't rolled properly before. So I cut it into 3 pieces because that's what I did. I tripled my usual recipe. I have to be honest, I often do make my pizza dough with egg in it. This is one of the times I didn't. And I find that it's actually a better consistency with the egg. But it works out the same way, I guess. But yep, so I made that last piece over there a little too small for sure because it did not have as much dough in it. You can see when I start to like roll them up like this that the last piece most certainly didn't have enough. I put the one on that side there. That one's actually going to go back in the bowl because I'm actually making one of the pizzas today. It'll be in a different video for you, but so the middle one is probably going to have the most amount of calzones after I cut up the dough ball and make the pizzas. So I'm just adding a little more oil around before I wrap it up in the plastic so that it doesn't, it stays a little smooth and oily on the outside. And to be honest, the more oil you add, I know it's such a bad thing for me to say because it's probably unhealthy to add way too much oil, but I find that I've always liked Pizza Hut style of pizza over all the other pizza places just because it's so greasy and crispy and everything so bad for you but so delicious. But anyways, I didn't use that much of oil or butter or anything like that in this, but it is important to cover it in oil before you wrap it up because otherwise it's just not gonna be as smooth and supple when you get it out of the freezer. So you just wrap it up in these little things and then you flash freeze it just like I did with everything else. I'm gonna flash freeze this, and then once I have flash frozen this, I'm going to put it into a freezer bag, like a plastic sandwich bag or a freezer bag, to stay in the fridge for, I would say, probably a month to a month and a half. We'll definitely end up using the dough a lot quicker than the other stuff. The pie crust might actually be in there for us for 2 months versus the pizza dough. It will not last in there that long. We usually end up making pizza on the weekend every couple of weeks or so it'll get used up quickly. But this one is going to stay out today because we, like I said, pizza, that's what we're making today. So now I'm actually rolling out the taco balls. I'm going to put it like that, and I'm actually gonna show you this sped up a little bit just because I don't think you guys need to see this all over again in the third video. But if you look in the description below, you'll see the link to my shorts, and it's pretty simple. You just, you make the dough, you leave it for 20 minutes, then you roll it up into these little balls, and then you basically just roll each of those balls out into thin tortilla shapes, and then you put it on the pan, cook it for 30 seconds on each side. 30 to 45 seconds. I find anything more than that, you're going to crisp it up. It's going to be like hard flat bread. It's going to be a little bit like a matzah, more like a cracker, not a bread. And you don't want the tortilla to be like that, because you won't be able to fill it, wrap it properly if it's that hard. So make sure you turn it in like 30 to 40 seconds. And if you feel that it's getting hard after you flipped it over, don't hold it there for too long. Take it off of the heat. So as you can see, I got about 15 balls in this recipe. This turns into 15 tortillas, which is great because it's at least about 10 days worth of tortillas, depending on how often we decide to eat it during the week. I'm actually gonna freeze half of it and leave the others in the fridge. So this is the total of what I've gotten. I have 3 balls of pizza to make, 2 to freeze, 1 to make, 3 rolls of cookie dough, and I got 2 pie crusts and 15 tortillas. This is gonna last us quite a while. Since I also meal prep and make freezer meals, this is probably going to last us at least a month or month and a half, all of it together. Thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please click like and subscribe to this channel.